Welcome to Defense Briefing. The content of the briefing includes more than 20,000 dead in Gaza, a historic human toll. The crises that may get worse in 2024. No one wants used EVs, making new ones a tougher sell too. A Times investigation tracked Israel's use of one of its most destructive bombs in South Gaza. U.S. investors see value in Israeli tech firms despite war. More than 20,000 dead in Gaza, a historic human toll. Washington Post. Over 20,000 Palestinians have been killed in the war between Israel and Hamas, according to the Gaza Health Ministry. The ministry writes death certificates for Palestinians in the enclave and has direct access to hospitals and morgues. While the United Nations often releases its own counts after a conflict, in Gaza it is relying on numbers from the Gaza Health Ministry. An Israeli official anonymously estimated that several thousand Hamas fighters had been killed by mid-October, a small proportion of a force estimated to be 30,000. The Gaza Health Ministry paused its death toll updates last month, citing communication outages and a lack of access to besieged hospitals, but later resumed counting. The ministry's figures have been questioned by Israeli and U.S. officials, who argue that the ministry is controlled by Hamas, which they designate as a terrorist group. However, a team of academic experts at Johns Hopkins University's Bloomberg School of Public Health, who used the number of deaths of UN staff in Gaza to estimate whether the Gaza Health Ministry's death toll was being inflated, found no evidence of inflated mortality in the data. The crises that may get worse in 2024. Washington Post. 2023 was a year marked by numerous crises and conflicts, and unfortunately, 2024 looks set to be no different. The war in Gaza is reaching a dangerous tipping point, with the territory's 2.2 million people pushed to the brink. The conflict in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories has been ranked as the second most glaring crisis to watch in 2024 by the International Rescue Committee. The civil war in Sudan, the world's largest displacement crisis, was ranked first. Africa is home to the bulk of potential hotspots, with 3 Coup Belt nations in West Africa, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger all in the IRC's rankings. The specter of a warming planet looms over these crises, as climate shocks affect vulnerable communities. The Biden administration will face constraints in its ability to address these crises, as it grapples with a divisive election year and domestic challenges. In Asia, an election in Taiwan could be marked by provocations from China, while Myanmar is headed towards a new phase of conflict with a weakened but still dangerous regime. Overall, the outlook for 2024 is one of increased instability and uncertainty. No one wants used EVs, making new ones a tougher sell too. Bloomberg. The used electric vehicle market is struggling to gain traction as buyers opt to wait for better technology, shortfalls in charging infrastructure persist, and a lack of subsidies remains in place, according to Bloomberg. Prices for second-hand EVs are falling faster than combustion engine vehicles, in part due to a price war sparked by Tesla and competitive Chinese models, and the lack of demand is leading to increased borrowing costs for dealers and automakers. The expected surge of 1.2 million EVs coming off lease contracts next year is set to exacerbate the issue. A Times investigation tracked Israel's use of one of its most destructive bombs in South Gaza. New York Times. During the first 6 weeks of the war in Gaza, Israel used 2,000-pound bombs in areas designated safe for civilians, according to an analysis by the New York Times. The investigation found that these bombs posed a pervasive threat to civilians seeking safety across South Gaza. The Israeli military has said that questions about the bomb's use will be looked into at a later stage. The U.S. has increased shipments of smaller bombs to Israel, but has also sent over 5,000 2,000-pound bombs since October. U.S. investors see value in Israeli tech firms despite war. Yahoo! U.S. venture capitalists and tech executives have visited Israel despite its war with Palestinian militant group Hamas. The 70-person delegation included executives from Meetup.com, Apollo, TPG, Susquehanna Growth Equity, MasterCard, John Deere, and Harvard University's Endowment Investment Fund. Ron Myasnik of Bain Capital Ventures, a co-organizer of the trip, said he believed the country's economy would bounce back, saying, "It doesn't matter to us whether the economic rebound takes 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, or 12 months. We're long-term bullish on Israel." U.S. China top military officials hold first talks in more than a year. Al Jazeera. The top military officer from the United States, General Charles Q. Brown, has held a virtual meeting with General Liu Zhenli of China's People's Liberation Army. This is the first conversation of its kind in over a year, as Beijing halted high-level talks after then U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan in August 2022. The two countries' leaders agreed to resume such discussions when they met last month. During the meeting, the two generals touched on global and regional security issues, and Brown emphasized the importance of open and direct lines of communication to avoid misunderstandings. Faith leaders host longest night ever to remember Kansas City homicide victims. Yahoo! A vigil was held in Kansas City on Thursday to remember the victims of homicide in 2023. The annual event, called the longest night ever, takes place on the winter solstice, when the night is longest. The tradition began in 2011 with a single cross being placed outside a church to honor one victim, and has since expanded to include the names of all those killed in acts of violence each year. Kansas City has experienced high levels of violence this year, with 179 homicides recorded so far, on a par with the deadliest year on record in 2020. The war took away their limbs. Now bionic prostheses empower wounded Ukrainian soldiers. Yahoo! More than 20,000 Ukrainians have had limbs amputated since the start of the war with Russia in 2014, but only a small number have been given bionic replacements, which is far more expensive than traditional prosthetics. One Ukrainian startup, Esper Bionics, decided to target the US market until the war increased the demand for such limbs, which is when Esper Bionics began distributing 70% of its products at home. Chinese-developed Golden Veil can make missiles look like passenger planes. South China Morning Post. Chinese scientists have developed a cheap gold-plated camouflage veil, which can make a cruise missile appear to be a passenger plane on a radar. The technology confuses expensive air defense systems and reduces commanders' response times. The veil is made of gold-plated metal threads, forming a web to reflect radar signals. It can be folded and deployed repeatedly throughout a flight, and can be used on warships and land vehicles. The veil is low-cost and lightweight, meaning missiles can fly further or carry larger warheads. Fat Leonard thought he was going free. Now he's locked up in Miami. Washington Post. Venezuela lured in fraudster and fugitive Fat Leonard by promising to release him from custody for medical treatment, in a ruse to stop him contesting his transfer back to U.S. custody. Leonard Glenn Francis was apprehended in Venezuela by U.S. officials as part of a prisoner swap, along with 10 Americans, in exchange for a Venezuelan diplomat who was facing money laundering charges in Florida. Francis is now in a federal prison in Miami and is expected to be transferred to San Diego to be sentenced for bribery and fraud charges, 9 years after pleading guilty. Dear viewers, I am Dr. Six, your resident observer from the 6 Degrees world, here to bring you the latest news from around the globe. Let's dive into today's headlines. In Gaza, the human toll of the war between Israel and Hamas continues to rise, with over 20,000 Palestinians killed. The Gaza Health Ministry has been documenting the deaths, though their figures have been questioned by Israeli and U.S. officials. However, a team of academic experts found no evidence of inflated mortality in the data. The situation in Gaza remains dire, and the conflict is ranked as one of the most glaring crises to watch in 2024. On a lighter note, U.S. investors are still finding value in Israeli tech firms despite the ongoing war. A delegation of venture capitalists and tech executives, including representatives from Meetup.com, MasterCard, and Harvard University's Endowment Investment Fund, visited Israel recently. They remain optimistic about the country's economy and believe in its long-term potential. In international relations, the top military officers from the U.S. and China held their first talks in over a year. General Charles Q. Brown and General Liu Zhenli discussed global and regional security issues and emphasized the importance of open communication to avoid misunderstandings. It's a positive step towards improved relations between the two countries. Closer to home, a vigil was held in Kansas City to remember the victims of homicide in 2023. The longest night ever event takes place on the winter solstice and has grown from a single cross to honoring all those killed in acts of violence. Kansas City has experienced high levels of violence this year, with 179 homicides recorded so far. Now, let's talk about some interesting developments. Ukrainian startup Esper Bionics, which specializes in bionic prosthetics, has found a new market for its products among wounded Ukrainian soldiers. More than 20,000 Ukrainians have had limbs amputated since the war with Russia began, and the demand for bionic replacements has increased. Esper Bionics is now distributing 70% of its products domestically to meet this demand. In China, scientists have developed a golden veil that can make a cruise missile appear to be a passenger plane on radar. This technology confuses air defense systems and reduces response times for commanders. The veil, made of gold-plated metal threads, can be deployed repeatedly and is low-cost and lightweight, allowing missiles to fly further or carry larger warheads. It's an interesting development in military technology. Lastly, fraudster and fugitive Fat Leonard thought he was going free when Venezuela promised to release him for medical treatment. However, it turned out to be a ruse to stop him from challenging his transfer back to U.S. custody. Leonard Glenn Francis is now in a federal prison in Miami and is expected to be sentenced for bribery and fraud charges. That's all for today's news. I hope you found it informative and entertaining. Now, it's time for you to join the discussion. What are your thoughts on these stories? Do you have any questions for me? Let's hear what you have to say. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.